Hi, it's Dr. Rowe here with Colin Harperpenman again. We're on another element. If you haven't watched the previous one, we talked about planning and also the planning process and also getting planning permission. What we want to talk about now is another element, and I was just talking to Colin while we're here to find out what he felt was the right one to cover next. We're going to talk about what the key people to have in and some of the key elements that need to happen really before any work start, correct?
Yeah.
So
getting the contractor in early.
Contractor, right. So we've talked about the planning and planning it out. We've talked about whether I need to get the planning department in. That was the previous video. If you didn't watch it, go watch it, click and go watch it. We're going to talk about getting the right people in, yeah?
Absolutely. Teams are so important.
Right.
When you're carrying out a refurbishment, you do need a team that you can work with, because these projects, they vary in timescale, and you're going to be working with these people a lot.
So think of it as two types of project. You might be watching this and you're just doing a basic refurb, internal, and a little bit of external. But while we're here, we'll talk about like this one, a bigger project as well.
So this project here, we've got a main contractor on site. I work closely with the main contractor, as with Roem, and essentially planning everything out means that we not only need to manage and work with the contractor, we need building control to come in as well to assist us on that, to sign everything off as we move forward.
When are they approached, Colin? Because if somebody's just doing a basic refurb, taking out the kitchen, doing the new bathroom, new carpet, stripping, that's not necessarily.
You won't need building control for that element of work, because that's just cosmetic. If you're doing any structural works, if you're doing any extensions, if you're doing any foundation works, that's when you will need building control.
Right, so we got many steel beams going in here, the loads being transferred into the ground.
There's a lot of building regulations we need to abide by with this particular project.
Right.
So once we had achieved planning permission, we then moved on to our detailed design with building control details.
Okay. For someone watching this, and they're like, we keep hearing the term building control. What does it mean? What does that actually mean? What do they do?
Essentially, there's a set of regulations that every property needs to abide by to achieve certain levels to make sure that it's safe. So building control is split into a number of different areas, which is from A to Z essentially, and you need to meet a minimum requirement per section. That sounds complicated, but this is where you work with people like the council or approved inspectors to get signed off at certain levels, because not everything applies to your project.
Right, and typical things include everything from the footings, for example.
The footings,
the depth of the foundations, have they dug deep enough?
Exactly, and that takes us on to another layer of engineered design. So not only have you got building control, you need to make sure you have an engineer's design to get signed off from building control to allow you to do your extension and any structural work.
So don't get too distressed at this point, as in this house is distressed, but we've got structural elements, we've got beams, the load has to be transferred, you've got multiple levels of load coming in from different parts of the house. That's your engineer designing that. Building control will confirm that that has been put in place properly by the engineers.
And they do all their checks and then sign it off. You can then move on to the next stage.
Right.
And the next stage
and
after...
let's say the builder's on site and they don't get it signed off. I'm sorry about the phone going off there. And let's say the builder's rushing ahead and for whatever reason something happened and they didn't sign it off. What's the implications of that?
So if it doesn't comply with building control, they can make you change it.
Right.
And change it to what does comply.
And people do this?
Of course. People run away with all sorts of work and you have to go in and get retrospective approval.
Okay.
Which is difficult once it's completed.
Yeah, and on that note, you can really piss people off by trying to do something and then retrospectively saying, I didn't know. Because actually, if they dig their heels in, they can actually, I've known people put stuff up and had to take it back down again.
Has to be rebuilt in exactly the same way or it just gets taken out.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can change your design. If you do it wrong and you do it incorrectly and it's not signed off, you could end up having to go back, redesign that. It actually costs you more money in the long run.
So the key here is talk to planning early, talk to building control early, talk to your structural engineers early, if that's part of the actual process that you're doing. And it's a bigger project.
And this is where an architect will come in and help you because he manages them.
Right.
He will be able to work with you and manage them.
Okay.
So that is an additional cost to the project, but it can take a lot of the pressure away from you.
So someone that's not doing such a big project, but they're watching and thinking, oh, I've got a bit of damp, I think. Is that an element we need to be incorporating early at this stage?
With damp can come in various forms. So if it's rising damp, yes, you need to get in early because you need to put in your tanking system.
Explain to them what rising damp is, because you're probably thinking, I thought damp was damp.
No, there's various types of damp. If you have a bathroom, for instance, with no extractor in there, that will go green, essentially, because the moisture's not being taken out of the room because of the showers and the hot water, therefore creating damp on the walls.
It looks worse than it is, actually.
And that can easily be treated. If it's rising damp, that means it's coming from the ground. That means that the damp-proof course has failed and it's coming through the structure. Once it comes through the structure and the structure's wet, that's where it becomes a health hazard. So that
You get
needs to be
fungal
treated.
issues. And if you've got tenants in a house, you try and fudge over it.
Exactly.
Black mold coming up the side.
And that will need to be treated. So doing that early, because that's very messy work, will need to be done at the very first stages, because that takes time. You need to hack off, you need to render, you need to put your tanking system in, and it needs to dry out before you can really get on to any finishes.
Yeah, in fact, we did have an area we thought we might have it here in the house, although I don't know if it was that. It was more the fact there was just lack of insulation, I think, in one part of the
Ventilation is so important. That's part of building control as well.
Yeah.
Ventilation. You need ventilation in a building, no matter what happens, because the buildings need to breathe, and that actually takes away the risk of any.
Right,
any
okay. So just recapping at this stage, if there's anything that comes to mind. So previous video we talked about the planning process and the planning of the project. Now we're talking about who do you need to bring in early so that you don't think, oh shit, I should have done this afterwards. So we're talking about building control, we're talking about engineers, we're talking about a damp contractor. In fact, if you're watching this and you're looking at doing a refinance, if you do not use the right damp contractor, your lender may require to have a certificate signed off. And if your builder says, oh, don't worry, I've just basically injected the walls, it'll be fine, the lender may not actually agree to that being signed off.
That's
you
right.
need an approved damp.
You need a certificate.
And the certificate is often have to be issued to the valuer for the refinancing, or even just if you've bought the property and it's a shell and you're bridging it and then you're going from bridging into a mortgage, they all need to see that certificate, correct?
Absolutely. I bought a property that I was given a mortgage decision in principle with a 100% retention without the damp certificate being done.
Right.
So that meant that I was given the mortgage, they wouldn't release a single penny. It was
£0.
100% retention on their side until I had the damp certificate in my hand to give to them for them to release the money.
Right, okay. Anyone else at this stage we can include in this particular element of the video that we're doing? So we've got building, we've got the planning, we've done that previously, the damp contractor, possibly the engineers. We obviously need to have our builder on site as well. Roof, electricians, plumbers, do we need to be bringing them in at this stage, or is that part of the next sort of process?
It kind of moves on to the next stage, because once you've got your building control design and you've provisionally got it signed off by either the council approved inspector, you've got your details to then work with the contractor to build up your costings and then take into account all of the roof works, the electrical, the heating, supplies, everything like that.
Right, okay. So, I mean, the other things to consider are we in a conservation area? Are there bats around? I mean, there are other more subtle things, aren't there?
They do.
We have oak trees at our home, and one of the things when we started our works is we needed to check is there any preservation orders, and there's certain things you need to be aware of if you're in specific locations. I remember looking at a property in Liverpool a few years ago, and the back of the property was out onto a park, and there was a requirement for sash windows, and they weren't going to give on that. Now, had I not gone to that earlier, I would have jumped in only to find out there was 30, 35, 40,000 pounds worth of windows, which I wouldn't have planned for.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that you've got to be aware of, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why you need professionals around you to help you if you're new to it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done the first element, which is planning. We're now talking about getting the right people on board. Watch the next video to find out what the next step is in the renovation of a property. It's Dr. Rowe and Colin signing out.